Welcome to the Underline This podcast, the podcast where we unpack the big ideas hiding in the margins, because the best parts, they're between the lines. Today, we've got an amazing podcast where we're going to talk about A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R. R. Martin. It's also going to be a new HBO Netflix series coming out in the very, very near future, meaning next month. So with that anticipation, I decided to read the book. And in this podcast, we're going to talk about the summary, which is actually 3 different books, all combined into one. So we'll go through each book, talk about who our characters are, key themes, what the plots are. We'll also talk about who George R. R. Martin is outside of his writing life. And then we're going to go into some insights I've had and also talk about underlying moments. Without further ado, let us jump right in by talking about what is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms about. So as I mentioned before, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms collects 3 novellas. The first one is The Hedge Knight, the second, The Sworn Sword, and the third, The Mystery Knight, which are all following the adventures of Sir Duncan the Tall, or Dunk, who's a humble, self-made hedge knight, and Egg, who's his mysterious young squire, who later proves, spoiler alert, so I'll give you a second to turn this off if you don't want that spoiler, but this proves to be Aegon Targaryen, the future king of Westeros. Now, together, Dunk and Egg wander the Seven Kingdoms roughly 100 years before Game of Thrones, the series that we're all familiar with, begins. And they're navigating tournaments, feuds, political tensions, and the fading chivalric ideals of knighthood. And each story explores different pieces of Westerosi culture, tournaments, feudal politics, and the roots of rebellion, while slowly revealing the bond between a simple knight and a boy destined for the throne. So if you're a big Game of Thrones fan, there's a lot of substance and protein for you to digest in this story because it goes into the details. I'm talking about why this book was written and why George R. R. Martin decided to give this perspective, which is very much kind of a lower levels view of the world of Westeros. So these stories are grounded almost like a cozy corner of Westeros, but there's less dragons and doom, more friendships, moral dilemmas, and the tension between what knighthood is supposed to be versus what it actually is. That being said, let's talk about Book 1, The Hedge Knight. So this takes place shortly after the Blackfire Rebellion, and the king is Aerys the First Targaryen, and the realm is uneasy, but it is a time of peace, so it's fragile. And in this book, Dunk is the former squire of Sir Arlen of Pennytree, a minor hedge knight who dies at the start of the story. And Dunk, having been knighted by Sir Arlen, which may have been a dubious knighting, decides to continue life as a knight and enters a tournament at Ashford Meadow. He meets Egg, a small little boy who's bald, who's also a rude orphan boy who insists on becoming his squire. Egg, as I mentioned before, later reveals himself to be a runaway prince who is Aegon Targaryen, brother to Maekar Targaryen. And at the tourney, Dunk clashes with Prince Aerion, Brightflame Targaryen, who is a cruel, sadistic noble who enjoys tormenting the common folk, or peasants. And Aerion attacks a puppeteer named Tencel, and Dunk intervenes, which is an unforgivable insult to royalty. Because of his intervention, he is then arrested and taken to a trial by 7. Now, Dunk is accused of assaulting a prince and demands a trial by 7, which, if you're not familiar with what this is an ancient and rare form of trial by combat. And he must find 6 knights to stand with him. So key participants in this story are Dunk, there's Prince Baelor Breakspear, who's the noble, beloved heir to the throne, there's Prince Maekar Targaryen, and there's Aerion Brightflame. Now, during the fight, Aerion is defeated, and Prince Baelor is mortally wounded by Maekar's mace, by accident. Now, the resolution. Baelor's death devastates the realm, Aerion is humiliated and later exiled, and Dunk is vindicated as a true knight. And Egg is forced to return to his family, but ultimately allowed to stay with Dunk as his squire. And now the themes that are introduced in Book 1 are knighthood as action, not titles. So have you ever heard the song by the Dropkick Murphys, Deeds Not Words? That's the song that always comes to mind when behavior gives more weight or experience and actions outweighs labels and inherited titles. And then there's also the moral courage to challenge power, and then, of course, the cost of honor. Book 2, The Sworn Sword. So the setting here is during a very severe drought, and Westeros is on the brink of famine. So the plot here is that Duncan and Egg hire themselves out to Sir Eustace Osprey, an aging, impoverished lord loyal to the old Blackfire causes, and Sir Eustace is locked in a bitter dispute with his neighbor, Lady Roanne Weber, the Red Widow, over water rights. Now, both sides are technically within their legal rights, but the feud threatens to turn violent. And Dunk learns that Sir Eustace's loyalty to the Blackfire cost him everything. And Roanne is politically sharp, ruthless, but pragmatic. And the small folk are the ones that suffer most from the pride of their nobles. Now, there's a duel of champions, and the conflict is settled by a trial by combat between Dunk and Lucas Inchfield, Roanne's champion. Dunk wins, but spares Lucas's life. And the resolution is that there's a negotiated peace. Rohan and Sir Eustace reconcile politically and emotionally, and Egg subtly manipulates events using his royal authority, hinting at the king he'll become. And the themes are deepened because it shows loyalty versus adaptability and the danger of living in the past. And then the last theme is leadership as compromise. Book 3, The Mystery Knight. Now, the setting for this is that several years later, there's political tensions around a possible second Blackfire rebellion. And the summary here is that Dunk and Egg traveled to a wedding tournament at White Walls, hosted by Lord Butterwell, a wealthy but cowardly lord rumored to be backing a Blackfire pretender. Now, Egg disappears. He's been captured after being recognized as a Targaryen prince. And Dunk uncovers a conspiracy. Daemon II, Blackfire, son of the original rebel, plans a coup. And several lords secretly support him. And the rebellion is poorly planned and essentially doomed. Dunk is imprisoned but refuses to abandon Egg. And the collapse of the plot, the conspiracy is exposed. Bloodraven, or Brennan Rivers, arrives, revealing he has spies everywhere. And Daemon II is captured without a battle. And the rebellion collapses before it even begins. Now, the resolution to this story is that Dunk saves Egg once again, and Bloodraven cryptically warns Dunk about his future importance, and Egg begins to understand the burden of kingship. Now, the themes that are in this novel is that there's idealism versus reality, the futility of doomed rebellions, and power as surveillance, not glory. Whew. All right, we just unpacked 3 novels built into one. I had a lot of fun reading this, especially if you're someone that's a big fan of Game of Thrones, because it goes deeper into the culture, the political intrigue, some of the history behind the backstories leading up to the mainstream Game of Thrones series that everyone loves. And also, this one felt a lot more lighthearted, but it still had that element of Game of Thrones. And it had more noble principles. I feel like in Game of Thrones, if you are genuinely a good guy, people use that against you and you're lost, or you get murdered or captured. And now this is the opposite of that, where the book itself is actually celebrating some of these higher ideals that Dunk and Egg live up to. Now let's talk about George R. Martin. George R. Martin, born in 1948, is one of the most celebrated fantasy authors alive, best known for A Song of Ice and Fire. And before writing fantasy, he actually worked in TV, notably The Twilight Zone and Beauty and the Beast, and wrote acclaimed science fiction and horror. So why did he write about Dunk and Egg's stories? So Martin has said that he wanted to explore the, quote, small folk perspective of Westeros versus the High Lords. And this kind of reminds me of Andor, if you've all seen that, where instead of focusing on the Jedi and the leadership and the Emperor and those that are at the top, kind of the minority that seem to be impacting everyone else, it takes the grassroots perspective where it goes to the people that are actually the boots on the ground, the ones that are doing the dangerous missions in order to help the heroes get an advantage. And that's how this book feels. It feels kind of like Andor, but within the context of the Game of Thrones. He also said that he wanted to fill in the rich but mysterious history hinted at in his main series. So going, again, into more details and deeper into the culture and lore and history of Westeros. And he writes these stories with really a lighter touch, humor and heart compared to the brutality of A Song of Ice and Fire. And he creates a tragic foreshadowing of the future because Dunk and Egg's lives ultimately lead to the catastrophic tragedy of Summerhall, still unrevealed. Now, stylistically, these novels also allowed him to return to classic adventure storytelling, duels, quests, moral choices, and good old wandering knight's tales, which is why I think this is one of my favorite Game of Thrones books, because it just feels like if you're someone that's really into the idea of knighthood, you enjoy reading the Knights about the Knights of the Round Table, so King Arthur, you enjoy like those quests, if you like The Witcher, this book is perfect for you. So let's talk about some of the character arcs and how George R. R. Martin came about creating these characters. So Sir Duncan the Tall. One thing I like about Sir Duncan the Tall is he begins as uncertain and self-doubting, and he grows into a moral compass of the realm and embodies true knighthood and he's the protector of the weak. And one of the things I like about this book is that it's about the becoming of a knight. He isn't just born great. He's actually someone that you least expect to be this great warrior. And it's not like he just became overnight. It's about the process and the development of him getting that title, but him reaching and it's essentially him becoming, essentially growing into that role that's been bestowed on him. All right, let's talk about Aegon Targaryen. So he starts out impulsive and rebellious. He learns restraint, justice, and responsibility, foreshadowing his reign as Aegon Fifth, the People's King. In the bigger picture, why does this matter? So this book explains the moral decay of the Targaryens. It adds depths to the Blackfire rebellions, shows Westeros from the ground up, not thrones, but roads, farms, and inns. And it serves as a thematic counterweight to Game of Thrones, so less spectacle and more soul. Now, we talked a lot about themes and the plots of the three books, but let's blend these all down into high level. So key themes. First, true knighthood versus the idea of knighthood. So again, Dunk isn't noble by birth. He is actually very humble. There's a lot of self-doubt. He's someone that is poor. You would not expect him to become the great knight that he does. But through the stories, we learn how he goes from point A to point B and becomes that great knight. And he consistently acts more knightly than men with titles. And the series explores what makes a person honorable: lineage or actions, which we all know what that is. It's actions. Actions outweighs lineage with weight. Now, power, corruption, and class is the second theme. So Egg sees firsthand how the powerful abuse the weak and shaping him into a future king who tries to reform the realm. And this theme is the moral backbone of their relationship. 3. Friendship and found family. Dunk and Egg form one of the warmest bonds in Westeros. Their dynamic is really comedic, heartfelt, and rooted in mutual respect rather than status. That's something I think that George R. R. Martin does very well, is he's great at creating these unforeseen relationships and friendships within his books. And he puts two people almost like a fantasy odd couple from his story, and he puts them together, and they have these great stories and these really deep relationships. And I think he's a master storyteller in this regard. Number 4, history's cycles. So the story foreshadows rebellion, Blackfire tensions, and royal politics that echo throughout Westeros. Now, readers don't know tragedy looms, but the characters don't. Now, 5, innocence versus harsh reality. Each novel starts with a hopeful tone that gradually gives way to the political and moral complexities of Westeros. It mirrors the Game of Thrones theme, where even small stories can reveal the whole history of a world. 6, the hero's journey. While reading this, I'm reminded by Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, which is a storytelling framework in which an ordinary person is pulled out of their familiar world. They face trials and transformation through conflict and sacrifice, and return changed with wisdom or power that then benefits others. It typically follows stages like a call to adventure, crossing into the unknown, an ordeal or a death and rebirth moment, and return with insight. And at its core, it's a map of personal transformation. The hero doesn't just win, they become someone new. Again, like that becoming of a knight. So a knight doesn't just become a knight because they're given the title. They're given the title, and then they live up to the title by making principled decisions. And in the context of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, let's talk about how Dunk follows this hero's journey. So first, he comes from the ordinary world. He is a nobody. He begins as a squire of Sir Arlen of Pennytree, living hand to mouth. He has no land, no lineage, no education. His world is small. Roads, inns, tournaments, essentially survival. And here's how his hero's journey functions. It establishes Dunk as ordinary, vulnerable, and unremarkable. He's a key for audience identification. Next, Duncan's call to adventure. So at the very beginning of the first book, Sir Arlen dies, and Dunk is actually doing like a eulogy as he's buried him. And it forces Dunk to choose to quit or become a knight in his own right. So obviously Dunk decides to enter the Ashford tourney to live up to his knighthood. And this is a literal call or knighthood without protection, without credentials. Third, the refusal of the call. This is where Dunk has self-doubt, but there's no refusal. Dunk constantly doubts whether he is truly a knight, but he worries his knighting doesn't count. He tries to avoid trouble, especially with nobles. And unlike mythic heroes, Dunk doesn't refuse outright. He hesitates internally. 4, meeting the mentor. So there are 2 mentors instead of 1. Sir Arlen, who is just a memory, Dunk's moral compass. A knight protects the weak, is what he teaches him. And then his other mentor is Egg, who ironically becomes Dunk's future-facing mentor, challenging his assumptions and pushing him toward action. And it's this inversion that's important. The mentor role is fragmented and unconventional. Next, we have crossing the threshold, the striking of Prince Aerion. So Dunk intervenes when Aerion attacks Tencel. He knowingly strikes a prince, an irreversible act, and from this moment on, Dunk is no longer just trying to be a knight. He must prove it. And this is the point of no return. He's crossed the Rubicon. Next, we have the phase where he's tested, he makes allies and enemies. There are trial by combat. It's in all 3 novels. And his allies are Prince Baelor Breakspear, Sir Eustace Osprey, Lady Rohan Weber, eventually, and Egg, who's increasingly capable. Now, his enemies are Aerion Brightflame, there's Feudal Pride and Nostalgia, or Sworn Swords, there's the Blackfire Loyalists, Mystery Knights, and the political system itself. So each novel adds a new moral test rather than a physical one. Next, approach to the inmost cave, the trial by 7. Dunk has to assemble champions. He has to find 6 other knights to help him. He faces death, disgrace, and the end of his knighthood. Symbolically, he faces the question, what is a knight worth? And this is Dunk's deepest fear, exposure as a fraud. Next, ordeal. Battle and Baelor's death. Dunk survives, Aerion is defeated, Prince Baelor dies, shattering the romantic image of noble honor. And victory comes with tragic cost, a classic Campbellian ordeal. Next, we have the reward, or seizing the sword. This is legitimacy without comfort. So Dunk is declared innocent, he earns respect, not wealth, and Egg stays with them. And the reward is moral authority, not status. Now, the road back. Life after the mythic moment. So this phase spans the Sworn Sword and the Mystery Knight. Dunk returns to the road. He must apply his ideals in murkier situations. There are no clear villains, only bad systems and bad incentives. The journey continues, but the clarity fades. And we have the last part, getting close to the end of the hero's journey here, but resurrection. So choosing mercy and restraint. Dunk spares Lucas Inchfield. He refuses to join rebellions, and he risks himself to save Egg repeatedly. And this is Dunk's rebirth, not as a fighter, but as a moral actor who understands consequences. And it's this return with the elixir. The next phase. Return with the elixir, which is the model of true knighthood. So Dunk brings back no treasure. The, quote, elixir is an example. It's honor without arrogance, courage without cruelty. And it's his influence that shapes Egg, the future king. Now, Dunk doesn't change the world directly. He changes the person who will. Now, I want to talk about major symbolism in this book because there's a lot of it. First, we have Dunk's shield, which is painted with a simple elm tree. It's plain, unpretentious, earthy. And this symbolizes humility, roots, and Dunk's desire to be grounded in real virtue, not noble pageantry. So one of the things that happens when someone is entitled, especially when it comes to a title or essentially like when they're titled, when they feel entitled because of the title that they're given, it's almost like currency with no backing. Currency, like for example, if you look at history, some countries, when they print money, but it's not backed by anything, it becomes worthless. And just because you say it's money doesn't mean that it's got a lot of value to it. If it's tied to gold or maybe something else, then it increases in value. And that's how I see someone who is entitled versus someone who has risen to the title. So for example, these lords in Game of Thrones that were just given a title and they believe that that's what makes them great, their power is backed by very little. Unlike Sir Duncan, who has gone through the experience, he's gone through hardships, and he's built his credibility, and his power and his title has real backing to it. That's how I see Duncan. Is he's the hero that has risen to the occasion and has gone through the journey and has gained power through the appropriate experience and process to get him there. Next, we have Egg's shaved head. So I haven't mentioned this before, but Egg, he has a shaved head. And really, he's done that because he wants to hide his silver gold hair so that nobody recognizes him as a Targaryen. And this symbolizes shedding privilege, learning life from the bottom up, which is the best way to learn from experience. Next, we have the Blackfire Rebellion and the underpinnings. So the Black Dragon versus the Red Dragon is an ongoing symbol of fractured identity, lineage wars, and the generational impact of unresolved conflict. Next, we have tournaments. They're not just games, they're versions of political battlegrounds. And every tournament is a microcosm of Westeros' alliances, slights, hierarchies, and hidden dangers. So let's talk about the upcoming adaptation that I'm really excited for. Cautiously optimistic, because I think it's a great story. But as of now, HBO is adapting the Duncan Egg stories into a series titled A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, The Hedge Knight, expected to be more grounded and less epic than Game of Thrones. Now, again, the books are lighter, warmer, and smaller in scope than A Song of Ice and Fire, the show. And we expect the show to expand side characters, add background scenes, and possibly foreshadow Summerhall more directly. Now, key differences likely to appear. More action. The novels are intimate, and the TV will probably amplify that conflict. And there will be expanded political subplots, not explicit in the books. There will also be a more linear emotional arc, since TV prefers season-long through lines. But as the show hasn't aired yet, everything is speculative, though Martin is closely involved. And what makes this story worth pursuing as a series? First, there's the Doug and Egg dynamic, which is one of Martin's best relationships. It's a mentor-student, big brother, little brother, knight, and future king, which I think is such an awesome dynamic for a fantasy novel. There's a lot going on here. It's funny, it's heartfelt, and completely unique in the Westerosi canon. Now, the novels show everyday Westeros better than any other work. So most of A Song of Ice and Fire is from the elite point of view. And Doug and Egg is about farmers, hedge knights, innkeepers, sellswords, minor houses, and the quiet political cracks beneath the kingdom. It's really the human side of Westeros. Now, next, we got moral clarity in a world famous for moral ambiguity. Dunk is one of the few characters in Martin's universe who wants to do the right thing, often does the right thing, and pays the price despite knowing it's going to be a heavy price. And this makes the stories emotionally resonant. They show that goodness exists in Westeros, even if it's fragile. All right, the next reason for why this is an excellent series to turn into a show. The hidden tragedy. Readers know Dunk and Egg's journey ends at Summerhall, one of the most important yet mysterious events in Targaryen history. This gives the novels a bittersweet undertone that Martin never explicitly states. Next, we got that this is a masterclass in small stories with big impact. So each novel is self-contained, but they quietly shape the Targaryen dynasty, the reforms of King Aegon V, the social fabric of the kingdom, and the tragedies that lead to the Mad King and Robert's Rebellion. And this is Martin's genius. The little moments become the big ones. And it's the most rereadable, emotionally warm, character-driven work Martin has ever written. And a perfect spotlight for a book review show looking to uncover the moments between the lines, which is why I'm doing this now. Now, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I'd like to talk about before we end for today. But I think that is it. So I want to thank you all for listening to the Underline This podcast, and please give us a follow on Instagram as well as wherever you get podcasts. But thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you next time.